I believe this is in October, is today the 2nd? October
Yes.
2nd, special meeting of the Finance Administration Committee of Eastern Oregon University. Welcome, everyone. I would like to ask Leanne to call roll.
Thank you, Chair Hoffman. Vice Chair Reel,
Present.
Dr. Ryan,
I'm here.
Chair Hoffman,
Yes, ma'am.
Margot Egan, sorry.
Margo, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here. Can you hear me? Here.
And absent today, we knew in advance, Brad Stevens, Terry Thompson, and Gary George. You have quorum.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think our board chair will be joining us a little bit later. So anyway, let the record show Mr. Thompson, George, and Dr. Stevens are absent. So this is our first meeting with me as chair. I apologize to you all for that, but that's the way it is. I want to thank Brad for having led this committee with great ability over the last many years. I wish he were here so we could thank him, but maybe we can do something at the board meeting, at least from the finance committee as well as the board when that time comes. So, and of course, Margo, a special welcome to you, and to Gary, who couldn't join us today. Arang, I don't know if we've met. It's a pleasure. Maybe we should take a few minutes. Is your audio working now? Can we hear you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Good. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oren Kikoa. I recently became a student trustee. I'm a senior here at Eastern Oregon University.
Well, welcome. You know, we might as well all go around, and since this is our first meeting, and we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. Just so I'm Chuck Oppen. I'm a retired physician. I grew up in La Grande, and now I live in Idaho. I practiced in Baker for a long, long time. So, Leanne, you're next on my list.
Perfect. Leanne Case, I'm the Interim Vice President for Finance and Administration. I provide support to this committee. Dr. Ryan?
I am Kelly Ryan. I ride on stagecoaches and also serve as president. Arang, so who else is here on the committee? Cedric.
Hello. Yes, I am Cedric. I've been serving on the board for a couple years. I started out as the student trustee, and I've been on the FNA Finance Administration Committee. I think this is going into year 4 already. So yeah, they're rolling pretty quick, but excited to be here and excited to get into a new year.
Margot?
Hello, everybody. Margot Geegan. I'm an associate professor of production operations in the College of Business, and I play games, lots of games, simulations and stuff. That's.
You can pass it on, Margo.
Oh, okay. Tim.
Hi, Tim Seidel, Vice President for University Advancement here at Eastern Oregon University. I'm passing it on to Jordan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Withers. I work in the Office of Student Affairs. However, I have the opportunity to work alongside all of you in the administrative support for the committee, such as doing minutes and helping prepare the materials in advance. So I will turn it over back to Leanne, as I do not remember who needs to introduce themselves versus not.
How about John Garlitz?
I'm John Garlitz, Director of Facilities and Planning at EOU, and I provide capital construction updates.
Chris, go ahead.
With Ring, I'm the University General Counsel and Board Secretary. And I do apologize. I don't know why my camera isn't working for this meeting.
No apology necessary, Freddie. I like the tree. Angie.
Hello, Angie Adams, Executive Assistant for Academic Affairs and Board Support.
Kimberly?
Well, my camera's apparently not going to work either. I'm Kimberly Newman. I am the Executive Assistant to President Ryan.
And last but not least, Susanna.
Hi, Susanna Moore. I work for Tim.
Did we miss anybody? Is anybody on who hasn't been?
Just your AV host.
Who is the AV host?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. Well, I got to read a couple of announcements here. It says here, the public is welcome and can attend this meeting via live stream. Please keep your microphones on mute unless speaking in order to minimize unnecessary noise during the meeting. If you have a question or comment during the presentation, raise your hand or put it in the chat. We'll try to keep an eye on that. And I see there's 2 already. Okay, perfect. We've already covered those. Great. And anybody who wants to add support, I'm really not very good at keeping an eye on the chat. But anyway, lastly, no written comments were apparently received for this meeting, and we didn't have any requests to give public comment. So that's that. Does anyone have any other announcement that you would like to make? Goody. Let's dive into the agenda. So I scheduled this meeting, as I mentioned, primarily because it's been a while since we've talked about the finances. We've got the fiscal year 24 year end report ready, and we need to think a little bit about 25. So I thought it would be a good time, especially with 2 new board members, 2 new committee members to get going. So I am just going to turn this over to Leanne, who, with John's help, has all the agenda items. So Leanne, terminology, I want you to pay close attention to this because there will be a pop-up quiz at the end of this presentation, and you will have to get an 85% or better to continue on this committee. And no one can fail this on purpose. So I just warning. Go ahead, Leanne.
Thank you, Chair Hoffman. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. It is often challenging to be able to manage through the presentation as well as the chat and watching for hands being raised, etc. So if you need something, just speak up. This is a fairly long presentation about the terminology orientation as we walk through here. A lot of it just has to do with things that you'll hear about during the year. So it gives you just kind of a basis for the whole committee. If you have questions, feel free to just speak up. If you've heard it all before, I apologize. You'll probably hear it a dozen times more as the year goes on. The things that the committee really focuses on, tuition, mandatory fees, room and board, that setting process and the approval process throughout the year, the annual budget bill. You're going to look at quarterly management reports. You're also now receiving monthly reports on the education and general funds. We're going to talk about the different fund types that you routinely hear about. We're going to look at some history on our revenue and expenses here at Eastern. A little bit on the financial ratios, and financial ratios have to do with our financial statements. So we'll talk more about those in January, and then just a glossary of terms. Your meeting schedule for this year, your next meeting is October 30th, meet again in January. April, you have 2 meetings. The April 30th meeting is where you will see or need to approve the final tuition and budgets for the board committee in May. So those are key times. And throughout the year, there's just a bit of a work schedule. October, we'll look at the Q4 management report. We're going to do that today. I'll look at the operating schedule. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of where we're at from the preliminary that was approved in May to where we're at today. At the October 30th meeting, you will see the annual operating budget for approval. At that meeting, you're also going to see the Q1 management report. So that'll be July through September's report. And look at the historical overview today. We also will have an internal audit annual plan available for you to review and make recommendation to the full board at the October 30th meeting. In January, we'll start talking more in depth about the tuition rates and what they're going to look like for this upcoming year. And we'll also talk about the history of tuition, room and board, mandatory fees, just so you have a good basis for that. At the same time, internally, the Budget and Planning Committee is going through the same work here on campus. So you're getting kind of both views of that. You look at the Q2 management report, and the annual financial statements for 24 will be presented to you from our external auditors. In April, you'll see the tuition proposal. You'll see it twice. You're going to see it at the first meeting in April, and then you're going to see it for approval at the end of April. So hopefully you'll be very well educated on both of those things as we move through the year. You're also going to see the operating budget for 26. We're already in the fiscal year 26. What we've started doing the last couple of years is just presenting to the board a preliminary budget in May and then bringing a final budget back in November. That's worked fairly well versus having you approve a final budget in May and then already starting forecasts and changes in November. But I'm open to however it works best for you. Again, things for approval: tuition, room and board, mandatory fees, the 26 operating plan, and then the management report in April. This committee typically sees these 4 fund types. So education in general, which are state funds, are tuition funds, auxiliary services, housing, dining, parking services, intercollegiate athletics, those types of things, our designated operations funds, and then our service departments. These are what we consider our major operating funds, and this is really what the focus of the management reports are on and really what you see. We talk a little bit about the grant funds, and John Garlitz from Facilities and Planning talks about capital funds. We have a lot more funds than that, but those are major ones. Education in general, fund type 11, state funds, however you want to call it, it gets called a million different things, is made up of our public university support funds, our state allocations, our tuition, most of our student course fees, internal sales, miscellaneous revenue. This revenue supports the mission of the institution. So it's most of our instruction, our research, our student services, libraries, administration. It's the bulk of our operating dollars. Again, you can see the drivers on the left-hand side, and then the expenditure drivers on the right-hand side. So I'd say 95% of our employee compensation comes out of education in general. Our auxiliary enterprises, commonly known to the accounting side of things, fund type 20. So you'll see those on our management reports as well. This is what supports our academic programs. So it's all of those other operations outside of our education in general. So our housing falls in there, dining falls in there, our student health center falls in there, parking, athletics. I'll talk more about athletics and their overview in a moment. General rentals, integrated services building, incidental fees falls in here. And again, on the left-hand side are all the revenue drivers: student health fees, room and board, student incidental fees, parking fees, athletic ticket sales, all of those pieces, and then the expenditures that go alongside of those. So when we talk about the budgets, the operating statements, the management reports, what you don't see is the principal payments that are made outside of the operating ledger. So just keep that in mind. Housing does have a bond out that they have to make annual payments on. Designated operations, very small fund, about $300,000 to $600,000 depending on the year. It's primarily driven by athletic donations, athletic camps. Our Rural Engagement and Vitality Center falls in there, a few things in the library services, and then some field trip income. So it's just the accounting definition is it's when 80% or greater of self-support activities is funded by an external source. So that's just how we keep it in our chart of accounts, separated from auxiliaries, and then the offsetting expenses that go along with that. Service departments, very, very small. Surplus property, telecommunications, AV falls in here. It's really things that support the campus that are service and revenue driven. So these items here are cash basis, so they have to have revenue coming in to support their expenditures. The only one that we subsidize is the telecommunication piece of it, and it's really just because it's convenient. So telecommunications costs us money across the institution, and rather than giving everyone an individual $45 a month for their telephone, we just do one transfer out from education in general to cover the expenses that are considered a service department. Intercollegiate athletics, and I'll pause for just a moment and talk a little bit about intercollegiate athletics. They are funded from education in general, auxiliaries, and then they also bring money in from designated operations. So throughout the year, you'll hear me talk about the different fund types for athletics, and we'll also do a little bit deeper dive at some point on athletics so that you can see how the funds flow through. Their primary operations for their sports come out of their auxiliary, out of their intercollegiate athletics piece of it, but they do transfer in from their donations and their camps into that to help cover those operations so that they can see everything in one spot. Most of their compensation for all of their head coaches, their primary coaches, is out of the education and general fund. So probably at the January meeting, we'll talk a little bit more about athletics and how all those things come together. They are a big portion of our budget overall, so it's important that you understand just kind of how those things all intersect. Looking at our annual expenses, education in general, about 88%, and everything else is 12%. So you can see education in general is the big driver here. How do we get our funds from the state? It's called the Student Success and Completion Model, the SSCM. There's a pot of money available, and agenda item number 4 dives deeper into this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. Just knowing that this is how we get our money from the state, which is about 50%, and we get about 50% from tuition and fees. Funding model is held by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, approved in 2015 and then revised in 21. We're looking at another revision of that coming up this coming year. So we'll be spending some time this year looking at that again.
Leanne, can I stop you just for a second? Margot asked if you're planning on providing the slides to the committee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, so I won't spend a lot of time on this because I have a whole other presentation today to talk about it, but the Student Success and Completion Model has 3 basic components: mission support, activity-based, which is SCH, and outcomes-based. The thing for you to always keep in mind, it's only for Oregon residents. We only get funded from the state for students who are Oregon residents. This committee looks at two different things. They look at the accounting side of things and then the budgeting side of things. So the accounting side looks at the financial statements, the ratios, the composites, and looking at that side, looking at the past, and then budgeting is looking at the information gathering, modeling, discussions, decision-making, monthly financial statements, quarterly management reports. So both of those things are coming into play and intersecting throughout the year. Financial ratios, and this is looking at our financial statements. These are the primary ratios that we look at as an institution. They're part of our KPIs, and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission also looks at them when they do their annual review. And we'll dive into these deeper throughout the year. We have not finalized our financial statements for 2024. So the information we have available right now is only through 2023, but these do show up in our financial statements. For the committee, just a reminder, here is the historical review of our tuition rate since 2015-16 through 24-25, available online, but these questions come up, so I think it's just important for you to kind of have it at your fingertips. You know, how much has tuition increased since 2016? What's the dollar amount change? What's the average annual change? These are all by SCH, so student credit hours. So just looking at that. So currently our on-campus undergraduate residents are paying $200 a credit hour. Our off-campus undergraduate residents and non-residents this coming year are paying $316, and our graduate students are paying $537. There's no difference for us because of the way that graduate programs are currently taught and how they're priced. There's the same at $537. We have committed to doing a deeper dive on graduate tuition as we continue to bring on more graduate programs and looking at those this year to see what's equitable as far as our students and before we price ourselves out and are we at the right price. So there'll be a lot more discussion on graduate tuition this year than you've probably seen in the past. WUI, undergraduate WUI rates are 150% of our resident undergraduate on-campus rate. So that $300 per credit hour just follows our our resident undergraduate rates. We have very few students, very few credit hours that pay the undergraduate on-campus non-resident rate. We have very few students that pay this $501 because we have a lot of programs that fall into tuition equity, plus our WUI rates, plus our regional rates. So there's that 501 is a big price tag, but there's not a lot of students that end up paying that. Our mandatory fees, so these are for on-campus students. They're charged out when a student enrolls in one credit on campus. They get charged at the full amount for one credit of enrollment. Student incidental fee at $376 per term, and that falls into the auxiliary side of things. Just a reminder. Student health fee, $239 per term. Again, it's in the auxiliary fund. Hoke renovation fee is $28 per term. That pays the bond on Hoke. And so Hoke had a renovation a few years ago, and that $28 that the students are paying per term is paying on that. It falls outside of the major fund types that you see. So it falls into our capital construction because it's part of the bond. So you're not ever really seeing that, but if you want more information on it, just let me know. Same thing with our building fee. Our building fee for years was $45 per term. That was set when we were part of the system. We raised that up to $85, I think 3 years ago, to be able to provide some additional funding streams for buildings like Hope for maintenance, Quinn, and then at that time also the field house. So for example, with the building fee, we've allocated about $300,000 for the students to make some decisions on projects that they would like to see done in Hope in the upcoming year. So they've kind of been given that charge. John's been working very closely with them to how they would want to allocate those dollars out, whether it's actual renovation, can't do much with $300,000, but there could be a few things, whether it's new paint, new furniture, any of those types of things that they might want to use on Hoke. And then at the same time, we're kind of looking at how we need to hold back some money for improvements at the field house over time, and then of course Quinn as well. The bulk of that fee goes to pay the debt service. That was institutional system-wide debt service at the time, so we have a few more years of that paying off. Once that's paid off, then the $85 per term will just be used for maintenance and improvements. Few glossary terms, and these are also included in your quarterly management report. Student fees, tuition, course fees, charged per credit hour at Eastern. Course fees are charged as a particular class, a lab fee, academic field trips, course materials. It has to be tangible. The student has to get something for a course fee. Course fees have to be advertised to the students at least 4 weeks in advance of them being assessed. So we're always kind of monitoring that. See a lot of course fees for art programs, those things that are really tangible that a student is walking away from. Fee remissions are also known as tuition discounting. They're what we call a negative revenue. It's the weirdest thing ever to talk about negative revenue, but it deducts from our gross tuition dollars. So at Eastern, we budget 12.5% of gross tuition to put into a fund for fee remissions. Our fee remissions are done primarily on a matrix. You have a certain GPA, you're coming into the institution at a certain class, it just goes into a funnel and you're given a fee remission. We also have other ones that are more specific to programs. The music program has fee remissions that they give out. Athletics has fee remissions that they give out. And we have a whole process for how you go about getting fee remissions. And then, of course, our retention scholarships are also falling into fee remissions going forward. When you look at the quarterly management reports, you'll see a category called government resources and allocations. It's how it's set up in our chart of accounts, but it is the public university support funds, our state allocation. We also have a small energy loan program. We get pass-through dollars from the state. So you'll see on our budget and our actuals for revenue, you'll see about a $632,000 revenue coming in. There's also an expense. We don't get to keep that at all. Gifts, grants, and contracts. When we're looking at the E&G side of things, this is really, it's outside of the foundation. It's things that just come into the institution. Grants is typically our indirect cost recovery. We're also seeing investments. So we have our funds and our cash invested. So you're seeing that come into us as well. There's some sales and services, housing, dining, revenue is considered a sales and service. Parking is considered a sales and service. Other revenue, internal sales, all of those things that you're seeing. Expense side of things, this is just a classification of all our labor. We split out our labor into different classifications. So again, it's just when you're tying this back to our management reports, you have that available to you. If you have questions, you can certainly ask. We consider everything in a service and supplies category that's not capitalized. So travel is considered a service and supplies. Pens are considered a service and supplies. Conference registration, anything that's not $5,000 and above. This capital expense category is outside of capital funding. So this is really just at the account code level. Student aid looks like is a scholarship, looks like fee remissions, but it comes out of the other funds, not education in general. So it just has a different category in our accounting stream. You'll see things called transfers in, transfers out. That's when we're moving money from fund to fund to cover different items. Oh, that just ends. Any questions? Wow, I really thought there was surely another something there.
Well, thank God there wasn't. Any questions? That was a lot, lot to go over. So here's a question from Margot. Are online students eligible for tuition discounting?
Absolutely. Sorry, I could have waited.
But no, I'm not going to continue now. You answer the question.
Yes, absolutely. We don't, and I should have mentioned that, it's in my notes. We don't differentiate between modality or anything. Any student is eligible as long as they meet the criteria.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, let's march on.
All right. We talk a little bit, give you a little bit of history on revenue expenditure, state funding. Most of it's graphs, so it'll go pretty quickly. Our education and general revenue and expenses. So this is just the one fund over time. So this chart, obviously, we go back to however far you would like to go back to look at our financials, but this one in particular goes back to 2018. And then a little bit of the draft budget going forward. The dark blue is the revenue, the lighter blue is the expenditures. So you can see for years, our revenue has been slightly above our expenditures. And then in 22, our expenditures start to exceed our revenue at that point in time. That's when we start to dip into our fund balance. So that's something we're always keeping an eye on. We like it to not look like that. But not to look too much like we're having too much revenue coming in. So it's a fine balancing act of being able to invest in our students and invest in our campus without dipping too far into the fund balance. Looking at our state funding versus our tuition and other revenue, you can see the orange bar is our government resources, that's our state allocations, and the blue is our tuition, our student fees, and then that gray bar at the bottom is all of our other limited revenue coming in. We like it best when state funding exceeds our student tuition and fees. So that means the state's investing more than the students are. That's what we like the best. That's what Tim and Dr. Ryan and the board advocates for in Salem for us. The uptick in 22 to 25 is really one-time funds. So this is our Strong Start dollars that are coming in. It's our True Plus PSU money coming in. So it's not just our PUSF dollars. So there's some additional things in there that are just one time. So it's a little bit misleading when you just look at this graph. It's still in the right way, still in the right place that we want to be, but we'd like those dollars to be more permanent rather than just one time. Our institutional fee remissions, you can see just from 2018 on the bottom up to 2024. In 2018, it was about the same level as it is right now. When I started in 2015, we were about 1.7 million. Now we're budgeting in about 3.4 million. So we've almost doubled our fee remission allocations from what it was almost 10 years ago. The dip in 23 is from I'm never sure how to explain this, but we provided athletics with some additional expenditure budget in 2023, and the offset was for them to get less fee remissions. So you see that piece of it, it's directly tied to what athletics didn't spend. Did not harm our students. Athletics backfilled that with their sports lottery funding that they just had to pay cash rather than using our institutional fee remission budget.
Leanne?
Yes.
Can you go back one slide? Do you want to talk at all about why do you want to wait until we talk more about the draft budget later, or do you want to address the increase in fee remissions now?
Yeah, no, I know that now. It's 12.5% of our gross tuition revenue. So it always looks like more. Last year, I think we were a little bit more conservative on our fee remission budget, and we could have done some more reallocations throughout the year. And we'll take a closer eye on that this year to make sure we're closer to that 12.5%. That's the director of financial aid part of me talking about that. On the offsetting piece of it, any dollar we don't spend in fee remissions helps our bottom line. So it's just, again, it's that fine balancing act between assisting our students and making sure that they have funds available, and then what do the financials look like.
Thank you.
You'll hear me talk about this throughout the year. Our healthcare, our retirement costs, this is tied to our E&G dollars. They're big ticket items. They're big ticket items for everyone. They're big ticket items for Eastern. You can see that they total over $13 million. And they're basically what we would consider unfunded, mandated retirement healthcare costs. So they impact our budget. We don't get to say how much we pay for healthcare. The only thing we get to say is the percentage that the employees pay, but we don't set the premium. We have very robust healthcare plans, and we have lots of options and lots of choices, but they're also very expensive. So this current year, we're budgeting in $19,755 per employee for healthcare benefits. We cover all costs except for the 5 or 3%, depending on what plan you take. So big cost. Same thing with PERS and ORP or retirement costs. We pay 100% of retirement, and so we're paying the full boat on that. It's great for our employees. We all love it. It's a big benefit, but it also has a price tag that goes along with it. And we don't get a choice on how much it costs us to fund those things. So the healthcare or the retirement plans are set by PERS, and then that flows into the ORP side of things. And we'll know probably November, December, what the 25, 27 biennium percentages will look like. But we anticipate that they will go up. We look at one of our KPIs and one of the board statements is our fund balance. Reserves, the percent of revenue. So this chart just looks back just 2018, where our fund balance as a percent of revenue has looked like over time. Pointing out FY21 when it hits that 29.93%, and we froze tuition after that. So it is something that, again, fund balancing act, we don't want it to be too high. We want to make sure we have enough money in the bank. And the board did, or the finance committee did a pretty deep dive last year to look at the fund balance, see if it was in the right place, see if these percentages still made sense. Back when we were part of OUS, it was between 5 and 15%. Independently, that just doesn't seem to be enough based on what we need to operate should something go wrong. So the board reaffirmed that this last spring. Our board policy is 15 to 30% range. Anything below that requires a conversation. Anything above 30% requires a conversation, but the goal is around 20%. This is my favorite picture.
Any questions? Next year, I want you in that photo.
I am not that talented at all.
How did you do in your half marathon?
We finished.
Good job. On the same day you started?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, even AM, in the AM.
Okay, I see no questions, but Tim gives you a thumb up for finishing, so.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you just correct me or clarify? In the presentation, you mentioned that online students, that generally it seems that online students' tuition is cheaper for them than traditional students. Is that right?
No.
Good. Good.
Online students don't pay our fees.
They don't pay fees that traditional students have to pay. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, on campus versus off campus, yeah.
So it is cheaper to go online. I just curious, just to get an understanding of the revenue streams. So
Yeah, yeah, it's not.
I think we could provide you a breakdown. Like we do have an Excel spreadsheet that Leanne keeps that has the broken down costs for an on-campus versus an online. So we'll get that out to you.
very, very helpful. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Hearing nothing, let's go on.
All right. You see the SSCM overview? Nice picture of Ackerman, huh? So I tell you up front, it's a love-hate relationship for me with this model. I love the complexity of it. I don't necessarily like the outcome for Eastern. I learn something new every time I look at it, and I've been looking at it since 2015. This is one of those where we probably won't have a test on because I'm happy to talk about this every single day. So feel free to come back and ask me more questions. High level, it's a finite amount of funding for all the Oregon Public Universities. It's only funding for Oregon residents. It's based on student credit hours, degrees earned, regional access, research support, and public service. So all of these things come into a very large spreadsheet. I'll tell you up front, it's very difficult to change our outcomes. What's mostly important is that we stay static on our student credit hours for Oregon residents and our degrees earned, and drive those up at a slight increase to offset the offsetting costs associated with adding more will often outweigh what we're going to get out of the model because we are competing with all 7 institutions. A resident, in case you're curious, here's the full definition of what a resident is. Right now, we also receive through separate funds outside of the SSCM funds for our COFA students who pay resident tuition, but we currently get reimbursed for the difference between non-resident and resident. Those students will flow into the SSCM in the upcoming year. So those students will be credited. Others that receive tuition equities don't come through the SSCM. So we do have students that only pay resident rates, but we don't receive any funding for them, including our Washington and Idaho students. This is looking at the biennium. So July of 23 through June of 25. System-wide state funding for the SSCM was $998 million. Breaks down at 49% in the first year and 51% in the second year. And then the mission support funding comes off the top. So we pay out the mission support funding and distribute it. And then the outcomes-based funding or completion is 60% of the remaining pot, and the student credit hours comes in at 40%. So clear as mud. This is everybody's funding. Looking specifically at Eastern, we are 49% of all of that. Our piece of it, what last year was $23 million. We're anticipating to be around $24 million this coming year. The SSCM is based on a 3-year trailing average. So every August, Reza and his team send in all of our data from the prior year into HEC. And then they run it through their model to see what are Oregon residents, where they fall out in zip codes or degree programs. And then they run it back through and determine the 3-year average of all of those. What this SICM doesn't include is our Engineering Technology Sustainability Fund, which is additional funding that we get. Sports Lottery is additional, Benefits Navigator is additional, any Strong Start funds that we received last year are additional funding. True Plus PSU support, behavioral health funds, which is new for this coming year, is outside of that, and then our COFA reimbursement. We do get additional funding from the state or from HEC that is outside of the SSCM. This shows on the left-hand side has the system-wide support, so what all the OPUs are looking at, and then on the right-hand side is just what Eastern is getting out of it. So out of the 78, almost 79 million for mission support in 24, Eastern got $12 million, almost $12.5 million. Out of the outcomes-based, which is performance of Eastern, how we did for our outcomes, out of the $246 million with 6.7 million. And activity-based, 164, we got almost $4 million. What's that look like in terms of percentages? We get 2.73% of the completion dollars, 2.43% of the student credit hours, 15, almost 16% of the mission support, leaving our total funding of the whole pot of money for last fiscal year at 4.74%. We're the smallest. We also get the smallest level of funding. When we talk about mission support, and this is when between the 2015 and 2021 revision, this is the area that got the biggest changes, that had the biggest changes. So this allocation's off the top. It has some growth in it. It includes what we traditionally have called line item funding, but it's more about base payments, FTE driven. It has a size factor for weighting in it. So it's intended to help some of the regional institutions because we don't have as much FTE and tuition dollars coming in that influence the model. So this section is relatively helpful for EOU. Mission support funding, 12.5 million. Base funding, we had 7.4 million. There's regional access at 3.5, public service at 437. All of this is based on 4th week numbers, 3-year average. Looking back, we do this $3,044 for research support. That is truly $3,044. That's how small it is. And then to bring us up, there's kind of a settle up that brings us up to the full percentage that we're due. This is where the testing would normally come in, but you'll just have to read through it. So for the mission support base funding, there's a base payment of 2.9 million annually, and then schools with less than 4,000 FTE, they receive some economy of scales allocation of $1,400 for every resident FTE in that the averages. There's also a factor for the institutional size factor, and that's how you come up with the $7.4 million. So this formula sometimes gets messed up in the model. Regional access operates similarly. There's a base funding of 2.2 million, and then you get additional funding for every FTE that you have. So it all plays into that, and then it rolls up to regional access for 3.5 million. Public service, simple calculation. We get $330 per resident FTE based on the 3-year rolling average. Our 3-year average was 1,325 times 330 for 437. This looks low. It's only Oregon residents. Mission support. This is our average dollars. This is how we get our whopping $3,000 is from our research support. Student access and completion, 40% after the mission support is distributed, looks at zip codes, looks at different levels of funding. So freshmen and sophomores are funded at a different level than juniors and seniors, or at a different level than graduate students. So this is kind of how it works out. I will tell you that the SCH on this slide and the average funding is probably off because I think they're last year's funds. But on the right-hand side, these are our averages from 21, 22, and 23 for SCH Oregon students. So for all of these categories. So you can see Oregon SCH is dropping. I went from 66 down to 64, just a few out of 23. So our average now is 64.8. Outcomes-based, completion dollars, however you want to, it's called a variety of different things. This one's a little bit more complex. It's based on, it's the 60% after the mission support is taken out. It's by degree, it's by level. There's some additional bumps for targeted populations. There's additional bumps for STEM, healthcare, bilingual. There's cost weightings based on the SIP and the degree and the discipline. Differences between bachelor's degrees, the master's degrees, certificates, as well as transfers and non-transfers. For us, and this is based on 24's numbers. We don't have this coming year's allocations yet, but our bachelor's non-transfers, so students that can transfer in, we have $1.4 million for them. Transfers 3.2, graduate programs for 582,000, certificates earned us another 100,000. The area of study bonus bumped us up to by another almost 72,000, and then our targeted population is 1.4 million. Again, on the right-hand side, you can see just the breakdown of degrees. I always have to remind myself, so I remind everyone else, it's Oregon. Oregon, because it looks so low. The numbers look so much different. Non-transfers, just some little things on the non-transfers. There's no discount. It varies by degree program. The bachelor's degrees are discounted to 62.5%. But if you graduate from an Oregon community college, we get a bonus, so they add back in 37.5%. Graduate degrees, there's no discount. Certificates, there's no discount. Areas of study bonus, there's more than this, but this is what relates specifically to EOU. This is where we would see our areas of study: computer science, biology, physical sciences, health and medical administration, and math degrees. Those are the ones that count for us towards the area of study. And then targeted populations, this $1.4 million and is based on underrepresented minority populations, low-income students, rural students, and veteran students. And each one of those has a specific definition behind it, which you can see on this slide. The rural students one is the one that always gets called out, especially for us. Because there's different definitions across the nation, across the state, locally about rural students, what makes you a rural student. This is the definition that's used by HEC for the SSBM. I threw this chart in and it'll be updated. This is based on last year, but what this shows is how much revenue we can generate by individual student in those different classifications. It's not perfect by any means. It's really just to give you kind of a visual of what does that mean in each one of those different categories. As we're talking about influencing the model, how do we influence Eastern's demographics to change the model? And it's all about balance, but this would show an Oregon non-complete or a student that comes in and doesn't graduate, but takes 45 credit hours last year, we would have earned $8,000, $8,618 in tuition. We'd have got a little bit in the SCM funding, SCM funding for the SCH for that student for that year. And so we would have, in theory, generated about $11,000 off that non-completer in 1 year. We look down different categories. You know, what's it mean when it's a non-resident regional student? So regional for us is Washington and Idaho. The only thing we're generating off of them is tuition dollars. So you can see the difference in what we're getting between the non-resident or the regional student versus the Oregon student. Added in here is transfer students, WUI completers, graduate students and stuff. It's just, again, it's just a visual. We use it at budget and planning, really just to kind of talk about what does it mean in all of the different categories that fall through the SSPM or outside of the SSPM. Questions about the SSPM?
Is it true that Tim is lobbying to get the square root of pi added into this calculation?
Some days.
Yeah. Truly a formula only a mother could love.
I do love it. I just wish our numbers were bigger. I do love it. I wish our numbers were bigger. The rest of this is all about the additional revenue that's coming into Eastern from this state. You saw this slide here. This is actually from last year because it hasn't changed from last year to this year. It's really about the biennium. So I'll just quickly go through it. But the SSCM, we get a reimbursement for our COVID students, True Plus PSU, viability, our engineering funds, our sports lottery funds. We also are getting some pilot program, nonprofit internship funds, the energy funds, Strong Start funding that we got last year, and then our capital renewal funds. I'll send you all this. You don't have to go, I won't make you sit through all of it, but this is just kind of the details of how all of that other funding flows through Eastern and flows through what you'll see for that government allocations line. But several add-ons last year and really in this biennium for funding from the state.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Chris. I had to look and see what it was. Oh, my. Oh boy.
Just wanted you to know I'm paying attention.
Yeah, good. And I appreciate that. Now when I close that out, I closed out the Zoom meeting. So, oh God, what am I going to do now?
Okay, well, we can still hear you.
I think I'm still in. I got to find my Zoom thing over here. There we are. Okay, I'm back. I'm back, baby. Okay. Any other questions on SSCM? Thank goodness. Okay, I think now we're Leanne, are we turning it over to John now?
Absolutely. I'm going to take a break.
Okay. Thank you, John. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. Perfect. Let me close out a couple of things and share my screen. I hope this goes to a big presentation mode. I hope. Okay, capital projects update. So the agenda includes all capital projects and process schedule. Inlow Hall Phase 2, Grand Staircase, and Hermosa Hall Student Success and Resiliency Project. First, the Gantt chart. So we have Inlow Hall, which is nearing its end. in terms of capital fund duration as well as allowable construction period. The grand staircase, ARPA funding, and the allowable design build activities are nearing its end on December 31st. CIR funding, we are in the middle of our 2023-2025 what is that bucket, and we will be getting in May the next bucket of $4 million. The Loso Hall Resiliency Project, we have submitted, they have scored, and we are in the process of getting ready for legislative session. And then if for 2025 and if funded, this would be the launch in November of 2025, and then the bond would be sold in May of 2026 through 2029. And again, I always put on this, the South Ball Field Complex is on hold. Inlow Hall project, the status is we're on time and on budget. Level 1 is moved in and operational, first floor. We anticipate full occupancy permit by October 31st, the end of this month. Level 2 and basement will then move back in November, probably a little bit of December as well. We're figuring how best to move that back, but the full building will be operational by winter term. Right now, level 2, roof work and basement work continue, as well as the exterior restoration. So here are some pictures of the exterior restoration that are ongoing. Notice the Juliet balconies are being reinstalled. This is level 2 as of yesterday. We are getting close. You could tell when they're starting to hang doors and place ceiling grids that we're getting close. So we were able to save some of the historic doors and replace them. However, we do have some new doors that do fit the feel of the original historic architecture in the second floor. This is the boardroom off to your left. We are installing the millwork right now in the boardroom. And on the right side is the old boardroom location, which is now the University Advancement area. I'm going to be an engineer for a little bit. This is my favorite part of the project. So if people who've been in Loso, they know in the past, they know the attic and the loft that gets lots of storage. We are ceasing that. This is the only access to the roof at an attic area. And we did this on purpose for a couple of reasons. Well, the main reason why we did this is because we are keeping the attic the way it was originally designed to be, is a cold attic. It allows the roof to be cool underneath it versus just on top of it. So we've placed insulation all throughout it. So we only heating the second floor and the first floor in the basement. And what this should allow is the elimination or the significant reduction of icicles that have formed on the roof that everybody used to see huge icicles. Because what would happen is we would heat this area and there is no insulation or very little insulation on the roof. We would cause it to melt. It would freeze overnight and we'd be creating these really long icicles. So we have gone back and we should be provide a much safer environment outside of Inlow. The phase 2% for art has been installed and is accessible. This is what it looks like. Onto the grand staircase. It's on time and on budget. So in our October construction activities include we're pouring the upper wall. We're backfilling behind the lower wall and the upper wall, as well as we will start to form the steps. So a quick update, option 2A prime was provided to the city on April 12th, meets all federal, state, local regulations. The only significant permanent change was the removal of the middle wing and the changing of the landing. The balustrades deferred to a future date. Meticulous construction is going on right now to allow for the installation of the balustrades in the future to be seamless. So they're doing a lot of form work and getting the angles and the chamfer and everything on that area to a pretty high, very fine detail, such that the installation will be allowed to be seamless without causing rework of the grand staircase. Memorandum of agreement with SHPO is being finalized as we speak. So the current status of the grand staircase. Here is a photo of the new lower retaining wall. This retaining wall, this was the top of the old retaining wall. This retaining wall had to be the old one had to be completely removed and replaced because it did not meet current standards. It was failing. It did not meet current code standards. So removing it, installing a retaining wall to current standards, to seismic standards, bigger footing, bigger, thicker wall has been installed, is installed right now. So here's a couple of close-up photos of that. The masons are working on the exterior. It's going to look fabulous. It does look fabulous right now. It's even going to look more fabulous when these masons get done with doing their magic on the retaining wall.
I would love to just reiterate that I was having a crisis of faith in this project last week because of public comments, which I believe to be both inaccurate and denigrating. And so I went down there twice, and both times I'm like, I don't know. I just think it's beautiful. And, I wrote a message to the campus last week, which was just delivered today. And I really do. I know Margot lives right there, but I would really urge folks to go take a look. It just looks really good. It is really coming into place. It is, you just don't see this kind of stuff built anymore. And it's just gorgeous. I'm really pleased with the work that's been done.
The quality of craftsmanship is great. Yeah, thank you very much, President Ryan. And part of the new standards, this is dimple board. We have a footing drain, so we will have drainage to that is a best practice now. So it's going to increase the longevity of this in my opinion, for generations.
John, is this staircase structurally sound enough to drive a 56 Volkswagen Beetle up and down?
No, but you could carry one.
Okay. Duly noted.
Are you talking about the incidents that happened in the 80s, or are you talking about the Mission Impossible or is it Jason Bourne where he drives a Fiat up and down the grand staircase in Italy?
Oh, there's a rumor that someone drove a 56 Volkswagen up and down in the 70s. I'm sure that's
not a rumor. I know the person who did it. Sorry. Good. So they're forming the upper retaining wall, and this is the footing of the upper retaining wall. So you pour the footings first, and then you come back and you form the retaining walls, and then you pour the retaining walls. So they will be pouring this on Thursday, which is tomorrow. So they are off and running on the upper portion. Here's a view from the new overlook area, and just some more form work going on up at the upper area. On to the, go ahead.
John, do you want to just talk about all the agencies that have been involved? Because I think we hear things about PMA and SHPO and all of the different, there's just a lot.
There is. So this project originally, if you look at this timeline that was published, thank you very much, Tim and President Ryan, the timeline is a good starting point. We started this process as a design bid build project with Waterleaf. There's been a couple of twists and turns there. We're engaging SHPO on two fronts, from a historic perspective as well as an archaeological permit perspective, because every time we dig into the ground, we have to have archaeologists on site should there be an inadvertent discovery, and there has been no inadvertent discoveries at all on this project. But we do have archaeologists on site at all times during excavation. We are consulting. There was consultation with the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. There is the city planning process, which is the historic landmarks process. So we've engaged them for 18 to 24 months on this project. And this mutual agreement, this memorandum of agreement is going to be between the city, is between SHPO and Eastern Oregon, and then we will have other entities as inviting them as concurring parties, which is the city of La Grande as well as Restore Oregon, to be a concurring party to it. A signatory is an entity that does a thing for the agreement, and we've agreed. There's some stipulations we've agreed to do in terms of signage as well as historic photos. And we also had a LiDAR of the existing structure. So we have a point cloud system. So we're able to recreate it visually. So there's just a lot of things we've done, and EOU has done over the last 25 years since it was closed 20 years ago. Anything else to that, Leanne? Or I'm sure I'm missing something, or a stakeholder. There's just a lot of different groups that have been involved.
No, I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware. It's not just an Eastern project. It's
Yes.
much, much bigger. And thank you, Dr. Ryan, for sharing the timeline out. It's going to be a great project at the end of the day. And some of us have lived through it, not since maybe some of us have lived through it since the 70s. I'm not going to lie. But it is so amazing.
Okay, thank you. More next meeting too, because we'll have a lot. This will be completed by December 31st. So we could have a sledding party. Losa Hall Success Resiliency Project. So the scoring came out. We got 89 out of 100 points on this go around. We're the 4th ranked university project. And based on our experience, I summed it up in 2 things. We need to keep our 4th ranking to ensure we don't slip lower during the legislative session. We want to hold on to our 4th ranking, and then have the legislature approve more than $300 million in 11 Q bonds and not revert back to their pre-COVID bond levels. We want, and put simply, want to make it clear that we believe 300 million is the new 200 million. So if they want to go higher than 300 million, great. So here's all the university projects. University of Oregon is 1st, Southern 2nd, Western's Data Center 3rd, we were 4th, OSU is 5th, OSU Cascades was 6th, Western 7th, OIT, Portland State, and then OIT again. OIT and Western looks like they submitted 2 projects. So here's what that looks like on a cumulative bond, 11Q bond. We would need to get approval up about 260 million in order to be in the fund line. And that's why we're saying if they go to 300 or more, then they will get a lot of several projects funded under this next legislative session. Questions, additional questions on any topic in the Capitol? Not SSCM model.
Well, that's great news on LOSA. What do we do to keep our 4th position? Who do we have to pay off?
I don't know. So paying off is just part of the conversation and showing them historically that they've never switched this around. That as well as, hey, look, 300 million doesn't go as far as it used to go. 200 million doesn't go as far as it used to go. As you guys could see from the grand staircase too.
Great.
The great thing about that project is it's most of the campus deferred maintenance is right there in that building. So once we clean that up, we're in just a much better position.
Yes. And that's why I'll point out, we're eliminating about 13% of our overall campus-wide deferred maintenance, but we only got 8 out of 12 points. So
Okay,
it's
thanks,
not
John.
quite the SSCM model, but it's an interesting rubric. So, okay. Yep,
A close second.
close second.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, then Leanne, let's talk about the end of 24 and the start of 25, and then we can be done.
All right, I believe all of the board members received the monthly closeout of FY24 in mid-August. So this is really just a recap. That closeout, what I sent on the monthly basis is really just the E&G. So this dives a little bit deeper into the auxiliaries, but I won't spend as much time as I normally would have before you start receiving them monthly. But just looking at the quarter four management report, again, quarter four is through June 30th, 2024. And this is looking at all the four major fund types: auxiliaries, E&G, designated ops, and service department. At the end of the year, we had received $61.8 million in revenue, 100% of our budget, our revenue budget, and recorded expenses of 60.4, 97.7% of the budget. So pretty well in terms of the budget and budget monitoring throughout the year. Our revenue did increase. This is looking at all funds, 6.4% over the prior year. Expenditures were also up about $2.2 million. Big driver in all cases is labor expenses. They're 80% of our budget, 75 to 80% of our budget. So they drive everything. There were no concerns about the financial performance of any of our funds. Only caveat is our financial statements are not complete. So there could be a change, a minor change, if they found something that needed to be shifted around in one of the funds or was classified incorrectly. Until that, these are really draft, but I don't anticipate that there'll be any changes. Looking specifically at E&G, we received 99.6% of the budgeted revenue and used 99.1%. You could get closer, but I'm not, just barely. Revenue increased 5.49% over the prior year, being driven by student fees being up, and then our state allocations as well. Over the prior year, again, a lot of that was one-time money, including our True Plus PSU sustainability funds that we received. Total expenditures were up 5%. On average, our expenditures per month are $4.4 million. That's just your fun fact for the day. We ended up spending about almost $1.1 million in our fund balance last year versus the 1.3 that we budgeted. But again, it was primarily because we didn't spend out some of the one-time funds that we received. So we'll be dealing with that issue in the FY25 budget coming forward. Again, looking at the specific highlights for E&G, we spent an additional $265,000 in fee remissions last year, but it still wasn't up to our budgeted level. So again, we're going to be looking at that. Graduate tuition was up over the prior year. MS Counseling generated $900,000 of that. They came on last year. So you can see some of the other graduate programs were a little bit less than the prior year. So looking at those programs as well, we saw an increase with the True Plus PSU funding and the Strong Start funding from last year. Investment earnings everywhere were up last year. Eastern also was up with $478,000, always helpful for us. We don't necessarily bank on that because obviously the market is volatile, but it's always nice to be able to see that. Compensation increases. OPE went up last year, $730,000 over the prior year. Some of our compensation increases were because we used soft money the year before, so it's a little bit misleading, but it would have been up more or less from the prior year. Direct expenses were up almost $2 million over the prior year. Advertising went up. Travel went up. We had Strong Start investments this year that we didn't have the prior year on E&G funds. a little bit of noise in there between years. I threw this in there. This is in your materials as well, but this looks at E&G tuition by instructional modality. So on campus versus online versus on-site versus credit overlay. It's just the way we break it out versus high school students. So you can see, I always get asked this question, so I just threw it in there. And then the fee remissions that come off the top. So these just tie back to gross tuition, fee remissions, and then total tuition by what we would consider modality. And this is how the registrar's office keeps it, or how our rate codes are set up. So this is how the funds come in. Looking at auxiliaries, that should say Q4, looking at the auxiliaries, revenue was up 10% over the prior year. Direct expenses were down, and different things happened last year. The year before, we did a lot of capital improvements in the ISB building. Last year, we did them in Ellicott. Same fund, kind of offset each other. We did see an increase of about $2.4 million at the end of Q4, but doesn't take into account the bond debt that was paid, which is well over $1 million. The chart's always interesting, when you talk about the middle years there, the 2021, obviously we had a pandemic going on. So you're seeing significant decreases in expenditures, as well as some pretty large changes in revenue over those periods of time. This is a snapshot of revenue, labor expenses, direct expenses, and transfers. Doesn't include depreciation, and then what the operating net looks like at the end of the year. Don't get too excited about that. No, you can get excited about the intercollegiate athletics. We're getting more in lottery funding this year than the last couple of bienniums. We are purposely setting that aside, holding on to it for what we call expansion, for things like the ball field complex, for investments in additional sports, those types of things that we need that funding for, as well as additional investments in student scholarships. So it looks like a big number, but it's going to go away. It's going to be used up here pretty soon. Integrated services building, another one, $546,000. That building is fully paid off. So that was something that we took on with the state entities that are in that building to pay the lease off. The bond is paid. We have leases on it with the tenants that are over there, but now we have to reinvest in the building. So the building is over 20 years. We did some last year. John has a full schedule, doesn't let me spend that money, makes me invest it back in the facility. But it is ours to spend if we need it for other things. It is actual cash. Nothing super exciting here. There was a decrease in the use of sports lottery scholarship. And because we used this fund the year before in offsetting that fee remission piece of it, we spent $810,000 in capital expenses in housing, increases in auxiliaries, which includes travel, just in our service and supplies went up by $180,000. Dining and housing revenue went up. I went from the bottom to the top, but incidental fees went up by $67,000 and student health went up. This is a combination of more students on campus paying the fee as well as their increase last year. So those are good things because they have been decreasing since the pandemic, which puts them upside down as far as their expenses go, because they just have expenses that are fixed and they have to be paid, had to invest in our students. So this is helping, especially with student health, get them out of a deficit. Designated operations, smaller fund. Those are, $949,000, $840 in expenditures. Their cash on hand at the end of the year, $1.4 million. You can see it's a pretty small fund. It is also very volatile because of the donations. The biggest components are the donations for athletics and the camp. So you can see in that very center, fiscal year 21, we didn't have any camps and we weren't getting very much for donations. So we're seeing a build back up in those areas, which is fabulous. Similar with service department, it's very, very small. Their cash at the end of the year, $33,000. And it's just very small funds. things that support the campus. We did discontinue motor pool rentals. There's telecom in there, AV, really not a whole lot going on in the service department funds, but they're intended to support the campus. Increase in athletic donations last year over the prior year, $33,000. We did have a full transfer out to the Rev to support the Rev of $100,000. Transfers out of designated operations and service departments from for athletics that went back into their operations. Donations $300,000, camps $190,000. So that $490,000 came out of the designated operations, went into their auxiliary funds to support the sports themselves. Last thing, again, all this is in your report. Indirect, we get funds off of our grants for indirect recoveries that support the administrative functions of the institution related to grants. I started putting this in your report last year. The chart on the left shows by fund type, so federal funds, state funds, private funds, where we're seeing the indirect recovery from, and then by source or by division here on campus. So you can see academic affairs, sponsored projects, $34,000 comes in off of the grants in that category. Or education, that still has that typo in there, education, $102,000. And our Head Start program, we make a $444,000 in indirect, but they have a lot of grants. Dang it.
With the misspelling of education notwithstanding, I am very excited about those results. So they could have looked much, much worse. And that's a lot of hard work by a lot of people. So having 24 turn the corner, I'm optimistic about 25. Anybody, this is an action item, everybody. So if you have any questions, go ahead and please ask them. Otherwise, if there are no questions, I would entertain a motion and a second to accept the fourth quarter report. Any questions? Hearing none.
Real quick,
go ahead,
Leanne,
George.
can you show that first slide that you started out with? That was kind of the overview first slide. That showed the graph.
This one?
Yeah, that would the all fund. Just wanted to see it one more time.
Can you see it?
Yeah, 1 second. We reduced about 6 million last year. We reduced 4 million last year. In I'll just say in staffing costs or general cuts. Is that can I get a quick reminder?
Coming into 25, we reduced 4.8 million.
Just 4.8 million. But the expenditures were up 3.72 or 2.2 million. So you reduced. You said we reduced 4.8. What did you say again that we reduced?
Yeah, this is all based on FY24. So it's all last year's actuals. So last year expenditures were up 3.72 over the prior year, or 2.2 million over the prior year. Going into FY25, we expect to spend we reduced our budget by 4.8 million. We have increases on top of the 4.8 million. So you're not going to.
What I'm trying to get at, or just to understand better, is you made some significant reductions and then you have some expenditures, but overall your end fund hopefully was increased by a little bit. Or I'm just trying to understand that in a way that if we talk about it further, how we would talk about it, how it was balanced. So I'm just trying to, that slide gave me a lot of just to want to understand that a little bit better.
And the all funds is all funds. So where we reduced everything out of is just an ENG. So, but you look at the E and G side of things, you're not on this particular presentation, you're not going to see anything related to the future. So when we talk about the FY25 budget, it might be more clear.
George, when we, for 24, we did dip into the reserves a little bit, and you are correct that we ended up the year in a little bit better shape than we had budgeted for. So that's why I say this could have it could have been more red even with the transfer of our funds, and it wasn't. So we're starting 25 in a good place, and then with the reductions that we're making in 25, the 4.8, even with the increases that we're going to be facing, it looks pretty optimistic. Again, due to a lot of hard work by a lot of people.
And I think I can help a little bit here too. So one of the things that we had to do this year was think about next year's finances, right? And so we had to project in rising costs of healthcare, rising costs of retirement benefits, rising costs of pay with wages. And so kind of from the moment I stepped into place, we had the projections from FY24, but Leanne and I were as we were looking at projections for this year, it did look like we were somewhere between like 5 to 8 million out of alignment in the budget. Again, and that was because of escalating costs, growing new programs, and being in a really kind of stable environment in terms of enrollment. Normally, we're really kind of dependent on slight enrollment in credit hour increases, in addition to, gosh, it would be great if the government gave us a wee bit more money, right? But knowing that wasn't the future for FY25, that's why we really got to work early and often on this and made those cuts. I hope that helps a little bit.
No, it does. I'm just very, sometimes I don't feel like, and maybe it's me not speaking very clearly, but visually, we spent so much, we made these reductions, we have this much extra. I do think sometimes people will look at things at if an end fund balance grew, the story behind that, when they made reductions, and in general, it's fine. I mean, I'm happy. I just think sometimes the story of it all, I need to keep hearing, or I think people want to keep hearing too.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And, one of the things that I think our university community did really well last year, Leanne and I checked in, I want to say in the third quarter last year, and we were noticing our community was actually spending less. Of course, 74% of our budget is people. So, most of it is always going to be accounted for that. But, we also did notice one of the reasons why we didn't have to take so much from our reserves last year was reduced spending. The message was out, the community collaborated. And so that was, I think, really good. I think, the real story here is, and this was my big concern, especially because there was so much talk about use of reserves, or what we call here fund balance, but I call it reserves, is we were looking at using 5 to 8 million of the reserves, and that would have taken us down to near 10%. And that's not an acceptable level of reserve usage for FY20.
Even for you, or for Kelly, or for you or Chuck, to remind people, I mean, I had to be you just reminded me, both of you, on use of reserves. I didn't see that in the slides, or I don't know if maybe you said it, Leanne, but I didn't see that in the slides. And I just think those are good stories or pieces of information for us to have, or us to remember.
Yeah, that is a point well taken, George. And I think we can kind of translate these accounting type numbers that Leanne has presented more into a big picture, where we ended and where we're headed. So we'll take some time.
Yeah.
And work on that, and try to make the story more understandable from a.
I actually think too, just Dr. Ryan, the way you were just saying too with end fund balance or reserves, and they were drawn down by 4 million or whatever the number is, and people even seeing that in 23-24 we had this much reserve, and then 24-25 we had this much reserve, and now we're starting out with less reserves. So people still know, like, we're not better off. We've just drawn down 4 or 5 million or $4 to $6 million in reserves. We've done some great adjustments, but we're not any better than we were, or we're still needing to be frugal or fiscally responsible or whatever it might be. I think that sometimes, to me, that's important for us to keep telling people we're working on it. I don't know, just those are quick thoughts.
No, you're right. I'll share, and I haven't gotten a chance to share this with y'all. So one of the things that I do every year is I do listening sessions with every single unit on campus. Like literally every single unit on campus has some time with me in group settings. And the second thing that I'm talking about is the budget. And I'm sharing that we are in an okay place right now because of the work we did last year, which saved us from, it could have been disastrous in 2 years. I mean, we were heading in the wrong direction. But I've also really shared that, we're not going to be able to make new investments in new positions. And the reason why is we have several challenges. We have the demographic issues that Oregon is facing and the rest of the nation, where higher ed is going to be more competitive. But we're also right now pretty reliant on some federal funds and state funds for many of our positions. So, for example, the Title III grant that Beanie Moses Mosebed works so hard on is really funding a lot of our lines right now. The rural grant that's used, ECI is what we call it here, that's funding several positions. The True PSU funds are going to fund the MSW, but those will go away. And so the worst thing we can do is, now that we're only at, sneak peek 89,000 use of reserves or fund balance. We can't just like go nuts now, because then we're going to have to do what we did last year again. And it's not healthy for our organization to be in this constant cutting mode, in addition to all the rhetoric that's out there about how awful higher ed is, right? Our people need to feel supported. They need to feel that we're stable, and they need to know that we're working hard to gain momentum. It's a difficult dialogue and certainly a balancing act. Feels, tightrope situation.
In medical terms, I would say that we have stopped the bleeding, but the patient remains in serious condition.
I love you saying that. And honestly, if there was like this one picture that shows all of these little things in a visual way, I think a lot of people will be like, thank you, or they'll get it pretty fast. And I am very visual, but I love hearing what I just heard. And I think if people hear that too, that'll be important.
It's not a bad idea. We could create a slide, Leanne, like what it was going to look like next year if we didn't do what we did. We could say, this is what it would have looked like. And now, now it's in a much, much better place. I mean, it was pretty scary.
I think that'll resonate for sure with me, but I think for many others that they'll need that to keep remembering or focusing and understanding how to keep, I'll just say, being frugal or fiscally responsible, and us kind of being very strategic, which you are being. So anyway, thank you. That's it for me. Sorry.
Any other comments? Is there a motion then to approve the Q4 report?
And do you need me to vote, Chuck, or you don't need me to vote?
No, I don't. While before you got here, we found out that we went through and no, we don't. So yeah, you are our esteemed guest. Okay, a motion, please. Pretty please.
I'll motion. This is Margot.
Thanks, Margot. Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Thanks, Cedric. I was counting on you. All right, so there's a motion by Margot, a second by Cedric to accept the quarter four report. Those in favor say aye, please. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Please say nay. I hear no nays. The motion is accepted, is approved unanimously. Okay. Well, we've actually segued into Leanne fiscal year 25. So let's go ahead and take a look at it.
All right, well, thank you. And just before I start, this is just an update. So this is just sort of walking you through what I've been doing since May as far as the budget goes. You will get a deeper dive and more information when at the October 30th meeting on the actual final budget. So just keep that in mind. This is pretty short for me. It's a pretty short presentation. So this is looking at our FY24 budget over our FY25 draft budget, which is where I'm at today. Problem for me is I put this together a week ago so that you would all have it, and it was static for about 30 seconds. So it's already changed. So I've already moved on into something else. So it's hard for me to keep everything well, that's not the right number, but it was at that point in time. So on the budget in 24 to 25, we are anticipating this view, $1.9 million increases in revenue over a variety of categories, including additional funding from the POSF, which is that 51%, as well as our performance. We received a reduction of $1 million that was built into our budget in 24 for the True Plus PSU first tranche. We have $697,000 remaining in revenue to come in on the Strong Start. Our Strong Start funds have to be spent by yesterday. So we'll be seeing that on a reimbursement from HEC. This year, we also received $667,000 for behavioral health funding. So that is new to us. That was not built into the preliminary budget. So that's coming forward. Nonprofit internships, we get another $71,000 in that funding from HEC this year. Our educational technology sustainability funding, we're anticipating will go up $13,000. Tuition increases of $811,000. Other increases, $133,000, and then additional fee remissions to be spent of $101,000. So total budget, revenue budget, point in time, 54.4 million. On the right-hand side is the differences between our FY24 budget after we took out the $2.5 million in temporary expenditures, or temporary savings and reductions last year. So we were essentially operating last year on a $53.8 million budget because of those savings. Increases this year, up to $54.5 million. So we took out the $4.8 million that Chairman Diller was just talking about, but we also had add backs in. So we had to add back in the 2.5 that we had temporarily increased. So there was some net results there. We also had wage increases from last year to this year, as well as OPE increases. We were able to reduce the True Plus PSU money out because they followed the revenue that we took out. And then there was just some general direct expenditure increases for things like increases in our escalation costs for contracts that we were obligated to and those types of things. And then we also had an increase in transfers in of 183. So that's kind of high level how we came up to the $54.5 million. A reminder, it's on everybody's mind. The $4.8 million came in last spring. The $4.8 million, can you really do it? Can you really reduce that much? That's a huge chunk out of Eastern's budget. We did. I'm happy to say that we are on that $4.8 million decrease. And this is how the departments shared out with us. And this is where we reduced budgets from all of the departments last year and what it looks like. This is the same information that was presented in the spring. Just really a reminder. Big hits. 4.8 million, we also had some transfers, where we shifted funds around from different funding sources of about $800,000. So the track bond we had used to pay from education and general funds would now be paid from auxiliary funds, out of those lottery dollars we talked about in the previous presentation, as well as some sports operations and postseason travel. And we'll be getting some additional funds in from Residence Life to help support the general campus. It's additional funds in from the integrated services building. And some of these things that you're seeing on the facility side is really just equalizing out where our expenditures really are and where they should be funded from. So we have things that really shouldn't be funded out of education in general, or there should be some transfers in. And so this was just also an opportunity to kind of fix some of that in the background. How do we get from the preliminary budget? So this is shifting a little bit from the FY24 budget to what you saw in May and approved, the preliminary budget, to where we are in the draft budget today. So we have additional state funding coming in, that 697 carryover from last year for the Strong Start, the new 667,000, and then some adjustments from what we thought we were going to get last year, but we didn't actually get to create that $1.3 million increase in state allocations. Same thing on tuition. We didn't quite make our tuition projections last year, and when this is presented to you in May, it's based on the FY24 budget and what we thought we would be. So we were short 730,000, so I adjusted that. But then we had some modality changes as well. So here we're looking at $27 million coming in gross tuition coming forward. A little bit of adjustments in other revenue, those types of things. And then adjustments on the fee remission side because it's driven by tuition. So that's how we changed the budget from 53.2 million in the preliminary budget to 54.4 million in the draft budget. I can guarantee you that probably will change again by the 30th. And then the same thing on the expenditure side. We went from 52.5, almost $52.6 million up to 54.5. So there were some changes in adding back in the Strong Start expenses that we'll have from that carry forward, as well as the expenses associated with the behavioral health that's coming in. And then additional salaries because we're added a new cohort of MS counseling and what that looks like as far as instructional costs and our MSW costs, and then just some refinement on our expenditure side that we weren't anticipating to bring it up to that 54.5 million. When we presented this in May, we had anticipated at that point we may have an additional add to our operating fund balance at the end of 25 of 640. Now, as Dr. Ryan referenced earlier, we're looking at an $89,000 use of fund balance. Keep in mind, this view right here does not take into account any temporary savings that we may have. Even though we wiped out the bulk of that $2.5 million in savings from last year through our budget reductions, we already have, after the first quarter of the year, we're already seeing about $400,000 in temporary savings for this current year. We have positions that are still vacant. And we have things that aren't being spent this year. So this number is going to change when the temporary savings are dropped in. And then we're going to use some of the behavioral health funding. We use all the behavioral health funding, but we're going to use some of the behavioral health funding to offset some of that MS counseling salary line and the MSW salary line. So you'll see some changes by the 30th of the month. But being fully transparent, which Chair Hoffman just loves. I just wanted you to be able to see the differences between what was approved, where we're at today, and then another view in a couple of weeks. So, final slide, FY24 approved budget versus the draft budget today and what that looks like point or time. Ending fund balance at the end of FY24, 10.8 million. So we'll be using that 90,000, which will bring it down to the 10.7 at the end of the year. Next steps, we'll present again on the 30th for final approval to the board at the November meeting. Dr. Ryan could share with you the numerous spreadsheets that I shared with her on every penny that changed between then and today.
Any questions? Yes. So again, realizing there's some changes and number shifting, I feel pretty comfortable with where we're going to be in fiscal year 25. That I did not feel that way 6 months ago. I was certainly looking for another board to join. Any
Just,
questions, Bob?
I got a quick question. If you don't
another-
mind. It's Margot. Quick question. Great presentation. Thank you very much, Deanne. It's awesome. I noticed that nowhere is depreciation reported. And I know that it's a non-cash expense, but it is a tax shelter for nonprofits as well. And I was just wondering, do we not use depreciation in our budgets? And well, am I missing something?
No, good question. We exclude depreciation for us is primarily on the auxiliary side of things, and we purposely, intentionally exclude it from the presentation of our finance. It shows up in our financial statements,
Gotcha.
and it shows
But
up
not in the
everywhere
budget
else.
presentation.
Yeah, but not in our operating.
Okay, makes sense.
Go ahead, George.
I was just gonna say roughly, it's about 20% end fund balance is what, if we spent 54 and we have about almost 10 or a little bit, forget what it was, but it was over 10 or something like that since the end fund balance. So, and if I remember right, there was conversations around what is a good end fund balance to have, with whether it was 15 or 18 or 20 or 22 or 23%. And I thought one time Leanne told us what the state said, or somebody told us what the state said is an accurate number to have. So again, what did the state say, if anybody remembers what that recommendation is?
Kelly and Leanne, do you want to take that?
Sure. The board statement says it's between 20 and 25%. So a whole bunch of things go into that. What we need for critical operations, so we need for insurance purposes, all of those things. So outside of 15%, there's a conversation. Above 30, there's a conversation. And I'm happy to come back to the committee again with the fund balance, all that board statement number 11 stuff.
I think that during our lengthy conversation at the board level, we landed on, we wanted to be better than 20%. We were satisfied with being at 20% as long as the patient was in serious condition. We'd like to build that up a little bit if we can. Right now, that's difficult. If I remember correctly, 20% is about 3 months of operating revenue. Is my memory correct on that, Leanne? So if something goes haywire, we can operate for about 3 months before we'd have to find another source of revenue.
Correct. Right now, we're at 2.36 months of operating with the $10 million.
During the pandemic, but did we have this 3-month rollover type of, or was it larger because of the pandemic? And we're just lowering it now to 3-month type of 20% or 3-month reserves. So, or is it the same? It's always been 3 months.
You cut in on out.
Yeah, I couldn't hear that either.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
I'll try and say that again. I'm sorry. My question is that you're talking about this 20% and how big picture it kind of represents 3 months of revenues should anything happen. This is our reserves. Right? My question was, where did this 3-month benchmark come? Was it derived because of the pandemic? Is that where we came up with it? In which case we need to readjust it? Or is this standard, this 3-month, this is the standard practice, regardless of a pandemic or otherwise? That's
Thanks, Margo. It's 3 months of operating expenses, so not necessarily 3 months of revenue. It is an industry standard. So when we look at our KPIs, it's what the industry would recommend, 3 to 6 months of that in our fund balance. But we look back, before we were, the metric was put into place by the Oregon University system. And at that point in time, when we were all part of the system, it was 5 to 15%. Since we've become independent and we are on our own as far as generating our own revenue and living off of our own resources, we have moved that metric up into that 20 to 25% to ensure that we have enough resources available. Because as you can see, it doesn't take very long for the fund balance to change. Had we not had this level of fund balance, and had we not received the $8+ million during the pandemic, we would have not had any funds available at this point in time. So it's kind of always that, how much money do we need and what's appropriate for Eastern? And that's kind of what we walked through last spring, of all the different variables that could happen and where we should need money. What happens if the enrollment cliff happens? What if we lose students? What if we need to replace something that we don't have any other funds for because we don't have any fallback resources except for that $10 million?
Leanne, could you go back and round up that material that we discussed and get that to Margot? Margot, that was last spring, so it's relatively fresh. We have a lot of information that Leanne put together that got us to where we ended up. So we'll get that to you.
And then, Leanne, I don't know if you have a ton of pages left, but I could also share something right now to help give Margot a sense of where we are versus other, okay, thanks. Here it is. So Margot, last year a report was made by HEC, and they judge us every year for our primary reserve ratio. And you can see here a list of all the institutions in Oregon and where they sit versus where we sit. And one thing you should note is in 23, we did decline. You saw that there, right? So it was at 20%. And so you can see where some of our sister and brother institutions are right now. So we're in a nicer spot than, say, Southern, and that's a good thing. It's something we should be very proud of, that the university has worked long and hard to build up these reserves. But we're not the best either, right? And so there's room for growth, hopefully, if we can even reach greater stability. But this was a report that's done by HEC, and it always just kind of judges our fiscal responsibility. And I'm happy to send you that report if you would like. I sent it to Chuck earlier this year and a few others, because it is actually, I think, a good way to understand how they're viewing the regional universities, because you could see there that they think, they're concerned about our health.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm going to add something that's probably not university, but something that school districts talk about. And what we talk about with end fund balance is usually when we're below 17%, we shouldn't be investing in anything. We should really be thinking about attrition. We should be trying to hold the line, basically maintain what we got. And then when we're above 20, I'll just say 23%, people talk about we should probably be innovating, or we need to be paying a little bit better. We need to be doing more things for our staff. We need to be investing into more programs or services. We need to be spending, or we have the money to spend more. So it's in somewhere in between the 15 to 23, people just kind of figure out what to do based on priorities. But 20% for me, I think I said it before when we were in that, is a sweet spot. I love for us to sometimes, if you're cutting or reducing, saying we'll go as low as 18 or we'll go as low as 17, somewhere in there, to let people know how much you just love them and you want to take care of them as best that you can too. But I think that's just a George perspective though, but I was pleased with where we ended up in general at the end of the year and all the work that took place. And I just sometimes for me need these reminders on where we got and how we got there for me too. So thank you for all of that.
Other comments? Well, Leanne, did you have anything else?
I don't. Thank you for your patience as we got the materials out a little bit late this month. We'll certainly do better before the 30th meeting.
Yeah, and you know, I know it's hard, but to the extent that you can get the presentation material out as well before the meeting, I think that'll help, especially with a couple of new members. So
Yeah,
so I know you're knee deep in alligators. So yeah, well, listen, thank you, Leanne, thank you, John, thank you everyone who attended. And boy, I
Can
don't
I
have
just say one thing? Sorry, before you, I just wanted to
I was
say
just
that.
going to ask you if you had anything else to say because you are the president.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I just wanted to say in regards to Leanne's reports, right now, we're not at census yet, which is why we normally have the first meeting to do the budget after our census, which is the 4th week. And so that's why, I mean, our numbers are always kind of changing and growing, but we are in a position right now where it's particularly in the infancy. So it's particularly difficult, like, because it's changing from week to week as our enrollment is still a little unstable as people drop and they add. So that's why we were in this case unable to deliver the full report. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that.
Yeah.
Just in case too, Leanne, all the questions that I had up before, if I would have waited for this report, I probably would have had a lot less questions.
It's probably, I maybe kind of ordered things a little bit differently.
Yeah, you did great. This helped me understand more. Catch up again.
Okay. Cedric, anything?
Oh, I'm good. I appreciate everyone that presented and shared information. I think, there's a lot of good conversation. Just where we're at, we are moving in the right direction. Just need to keep an eye on the target all times. I really like the progress that's been made. A couple folks mentioned it, just making sure we're remaining transparent, keeping community involved with what we're doing. But I look forward to continuing to work with this community and or this community, yes, the community and the committee. A little bit of a restructure to it, but welcome to the new members on this committee. And I look forward to a fantastic 2024-25 school year.
Thanks. Margot, any thoughts after your first Finance and Administration Committee meeting?
Oh, I'm very excited about being part of this group. Leanne, you did a wonderful job of explaining in detail, and I really appreciate the time that you took into putting in that. Kelly, thank you for showing me that it was like the Clef Notes for me, so it was perfect to show me where everyone was, and I'm a firm believer in risk pools and provisional funding just in case something should happen. So it's nice to know where our sweet spot is. And thank you everybody for taking the time to explain things to me, to get me on the board running, and I'm very excited to be here. I got it.
Okay, Ring, any thoughts you have? Are you still with us?
Yes, hello, thank you. No, it's more so thank you for filling me in. Yes, it's my first meeting with everyone, so it's a lot to take in for now. But
what were you thinking when you got yourself into this? That's what we're all thinking, I think.
Lots of acronyms. I'm just joking.
Yeah. I apologize for that. I had a board retreat on another board last week, and that the acronyms were brought up, and I said, well, look, I'll just go through the presentation and write down on the acronyms what they mean. I said to myself, how long can that take? 4 pages of acronyms that I had to send to these guys. It took me about 3 hours. So
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just note, we're in our orientation that we actually have a glossary of acronyms for you. So,
oh, fantastic. That'll be
and
great.
you as well, Margot. We'll see that at our orientation next week.
That's great.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, anybody else? Let the record show that we got you out of here a little over 15 minutes early. And that, not my best performance, but But we'll keep working on it. Okay, everybody, thanks very much. See you down the trail.